Hi, this is Dr. Randy Bach. I'm here with an episode of vital information for you. I'm here with Yaakov Ophir from Israel, and he's been studying ADHD and its basis and the way forward. Yaakov, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, I'm very excited to be here on your show. So I'm a clinical psychologist, and I'm a research associate at the Technion, Israel Institute of Technology, but I'm also affiliated with the University of Cambridge. And my primary field of research is actually not ADHD. It's technology and psychology, and more specifically, how can we harness technological advancements such as AI to predict and detect suicide risk on time, and then offer treatment. So this is my main field. But once my firstborn child was born, my oldest child was born, it was 11 years ago. I suddenly encountered, I was forced to learn this subject of ADHD. Of course, I knew about it. I'm a clinical psychologist. I knew about it, but I knew the basics. And but when my firstborn son was diagnosed at the age of 4.5, it was really amazing, and with a strong recommendation to start medical treatment. So I had to dive into the literature and to learn about it. So and what I discovered is in my opinion mind-blowing, and I'm happy to share your viewers with my findings.
I'd like that. I'm just going to preface. My sons are men now. They're one's in his 30s, the other's in his 20s, and when the older one, a similar situation, they wanted to put him on medication, and we made some accommodations. He had trouble kind of getting his thoughts onto paper. I was Dragon dictation existed at the time, and we had him dictating his thoughts, and he'd be out running or walking and dictating into a recorder or whatever. We didn't have smartphones back then, and transcribe his stuff, and then he would work those into his papers, and he did fine as time went on. But the diagnosis was always hovering, and everyone wanted to be on medication, the behavioral things, so forth. But there are other ways of accommodating oftentimes, and I think you're going to get into some of that. So I'm not going to, steal your thunder here.
No, but I'm actually, it's very, it's refreshing to talk to someone who really knows this subject from so closely, and you have experience. So I would love to hear your thoughts about it. So anyway, about a little more than 3 years ago, I published my first article on this topic, and it was a Hebrew article. And from time to time, I publish articles that are not academics, just for alongside my academic endeavors. I like to appear on radio shows and TV, and this is my way to give back to the community and to translate complex material to simple terms. And usually I do it in Hebrew. It's much easier for me. So I was publishing this article on ADHD, and I wasn't prepared to what happened next. This article was published in a place called Haaretz. It's a big newspaper in Israel, but not the biggest.
The New York Times of Israel.
Yeah, something like that. And suddenly, the whole country read it. It was really inspiring and scary at the same time. And my phone started to. I should say that the title of the article was the same as the title of my book. This is my book here. You can see it over here. Here.
There. Right in front. Put it in front of your face. It's easier.
Yeah. Oh, there it is. Yes. So you can see that ADHD is not an illness and Ritalin is not a cure. That was the title also of the article in Hebrew, and my phone didn't stop ringing. I was asked by all the media here in Israel to come and to explain about about this article, and this article became one of the most read articles in that year. That was years ago. And but along with the excitement, there were also many attacks, and after 2 weeks of this buzz and also attacks, I caved. I went back to the closet and started to do my homework and started to do research, like scientific research, without any funding, because I didn't have. No one wanted to give me funding for this journey. And so I did my own research, and I started doing scientific criticism, something that I became very good at. I was forced. It wasn't my, as I said before, it wasn't my primary field of research. And then I received a complaint, an official complaint by the Ministry of Health here in Israel, and I was scared because my license. I'm a clinical psychologist, and my license was at risk. And so this complaint essentially forced me to start writing more academic papers, and then this book that I just showed you. So in a way, I'm happy of this journey and of the attacks that I absorbed. But as you can imagine, it wasn't easy. It was even scary because I'm not a politician. I'm not that kind of a guy. So yeah, this is the story.
So that's an amazing thing. So let's go to the next phase. You have the concept, and I assume you had been working with your own son for some, say, more interpersonal accommodations rather than throwing a medication. I'm just going to preface, I went to medical school when dinosaurs walked the earth, actually not that long ago. I graduated in the 1980s. And I was awake for most of medical school, I tell people. I actually had to be. I was paid. I did audio visual, so I was actually paid to be awake during the lecture, so I can prove it. Anyway, we were always told amphetamines, there was no medical cause to write them because they've been debunked as a medication for weight loss and whatnot, because they were addictive. They have tachyphylaxis, which basically tachy means fast, phylaxis means accommodation. And so people who, my wife drinks coffee every day. I never drink coffee. If each of us has a cup of coffee on a given day, I will get a bolt. I get a jolt, a bolt, and I'll get the effect of it because I'm basically naive or virgin to caffeine, and she's not. So she doesn't really get much zing out of her coffee, and I do. So tachyphylaxis is this accommodation principle, which we're all familiar with the addictive medications, and amphetamines qualify, and so do opioids, where you keep needing more and more to get them. So it always seemed inimical to me once this kind of came in phase or popularized that Ritalin, Adderall, amphetamines were the medication of choice for this thing called ADHD. At the time, I think it was just called ADD. So it seemed odd to me. So that's kind of my predilection and whatnot. I'm just going to preface, there was an article you're probably familiar with in 2012 in the New York Times, in our New York Times, the New York Times, we call it, by a Dr. Alan Sroufe. I think he's also a clinical psychologist. S-R-O-U-F-E, Alan Sroufe. He's retired, long retired now, and he wrote an article in 2012 called Ritalin Gone Wrong. And I found this really, stunning article, and it goes over, I think, some of the things you're going to be talking about as well, but it doesn't seem to have gotten anywhere. The number of medication prescriptions for amphetamines, Ritalin, I guess Adderall and whatnot, have skyrocketed, and they continue to. So anyway, so let's kind of what happened between the article and then the further research. What did you discover along the way?
Okay, so let's start from the beginning. Maybe I'll show something in my presentation. Can you share the viewers?
Absolutely. Oops, there we go.
So this is my son, my aunt. It's not a good resolution. It's just there, and this is a keynote. This is a keynote lecture by Professor Russell Barkley. Russell Barkley is the big name in ADHD and conduct disorders, and and if we have time, this is a 1 minute video. We can hear how Berkeley, who is the can be seen as the representative of the scientific consensus, how the scientific consensus views how it view the basic of ADHD, and then I explain what is the problem with that. Can I show it?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay.
So I want you to understand that you have a brain. The back part of it is where you learn. The front part is where you do. Knowledge, performance, knowing, doing. And ADHD splits them apart. I don't care what you know, you won't use it. You can be the brightest kid in the world, not going to matter. So you got a real problem on your hands because you can know stuff and you won't do stuff. All of this in ADHD is due to neurogenetic deficits. And that means that medication is absolutely justifiable. After all, if you have a neurogenetic disorder, then neurogenetic therapies have a role to play in your disorder, and they do. 80% of people with ADHD will be on medication at some point in their life. And good thing, it's the most effective thing we have. There are other things we can do, but that's the most effective. It means that ADHD is the diabetes of psychiatry. It's a chronic disorder that must be managed every day to prevent the secondary harms it's going to cause. But there is no cure for this disorder. Now, about 1 in 6 people might outgrow it, maybe as many as 1 in 3, not sure yet. But the vast majority, 2/3, are going to continue to be ADHD in adulthood. And they need to view ADHD as diabetes of the brain. It's a chronic disorder.
Okay, so imagine what happened when my child was given this diagnosis. I knew that it's a chronic disorder. It's a chronic brain deficit and a neurogenetic deficit that has to be managed, not even cured, managed with this powerful medications, psychiatric medications, amphetamines or methamphetamines or methylphenidate every day, because it's like a diabetes. And the hidden message, and he will not, I don't think he will say it out loud, but the hidden message is also that there is a biochemical imbalance in the brain.
Yeah.
The biochemical imbalance theory that no psychiatrist will ever say it up front, but every parent will tell you that this is what they understood from their doctor, that the child has a biochemical imbalance. And what can you do? The only thing you can do is to give them these medications to bring back the balance. Of course, this is a myth, but this is the foundations, the way that the scientific consensus sees ADHD. But and can you put the okay? So and in 2002, Berkeley and Associates, they published a scientific consensus statement. And in this statement, they say very harsh things. They say that whoever disagrees, first of all, they say that there is, in fact, there is no such disagreement. They say that everybody agrees about the existence of this entity that is called ADHD, and whoever, and if other people, if some people, some doctors or physicians or scientists, they disagree with it, then the media should help. The media can help, and not to purveying the propaganda of some social critics and fringe doctors, right? The fringe doctors whose political agenda would have you and the public believe that there is no real disorder here, and listen to that. This is the best.
Where have I heard this before?
To publish stories that ADHD is a fictitious disorder or merely a conflict between today's Huckleberry Finns and their caregivers is tantamount to declaring the earth flat, the laws of gravity debatable, and the periodic table in chemistry a fraud. So this is how I was treated when I first came out with my position about ADHD, but this goes all the way back to 2002, and this is how scientific consensus relate to people who disagree.
Yeah,
and the truth, yeah.
I'm going to interrupt for 1 second because I found this slide, which I think is relevant to your situation in a sense. This was about some other similar thing where for me, there's two definitions of science. Science is the body of knowledge, okay? But science is also the scientific process by which things have to be weighed and compared all the time. So it's a constant iterative process of weighing, so that the science, pre-Newtonian science, I think, was pretty good, but Newtonian science was even better. And Newton science stayed for a long time, but there's always going to be adjustments. You can't say that Newton settled everything, even though almost everything we do is Newtonian. I mean, everything, on our scale is Newtonian, but there are aspects of it that don't accord to its reality. So you always have to keep literally a critical eye in order to have this gauged properly. So I'm going to
exactly. And the essence of science is discourse.
Exactly right.
And also, if you think of Karl Popper, in science, we always look for the refutation. We look for what Karl Popper called the black swan, the single instance that does not fit the theory. This is what we do in science. We do not only confirm what we already know. We try to refute it, to challenge it.
Exactly right. So yes. Left and right here, we have science versus pseudoscience. And if your words and your theories are scientific, they will withstand this stress testing. You don't want to get in an airplane that's never been tested. You don't want to get in a car that's never been driven. You want people to test it out and have it run through the pace to make sure it's safe. So science, real science, is ask a question, do research, blah, 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 do the experiments. If your procedure is working, you have to go back and troubleshoot. This has an iterative process, a cycle. Pseudoscience is do not dare or want to ask questions. So that's kind of part one of Dr. Barkley over there.
Yeah.
And then if you discard data that doesn't align with your model, and then you have to trust the experts. The experts are the experts because they're the experts and you're not. And so they have an advantage over you, and they'll be able to kind of dictate who comes in and out of this box. If you're not allowed in, then you probably shouldn't be there in the first place, and nobody else. Anyway, so I apologize for the interjection. I'm going to show one other slide, which I collected here. This is the article I was mentioning earlier, Ritalin Gone Wrong. This is 2012, New York Times. And he has, I'm going to just put these up. People can, cut and stop and pause this later on if they want to read this. I'm not going to spend too much time on it. But his article is very much, it's open, even though New York Times is not. This article is open because it's so old, you can go find it and read it. But he makes some excellent points there, and I'm going to leave it there for now. Anyway, so well, let's get back to your thoughts.
So first of all, let me say that the New York Times did a really great job back then, and I think at around the time that you maybe a little later also giving Alan Schwartz, the journalist, giving him a platform to publish several articles, very interesting articles, powerful articles in my opinion, and then Alan Schwartz also published his book. I'm not sure. I think it is called the Ritalin Nation or something like that. But he interviews Dr. Keith Connors. Dr. Keith Connors already passed away, but Dr. Keith Connors is one of the founders of ADHD. Sometimes he's called the father of ADHD. And Dr. Keith Connors, according to this journalist, to Alan Schwartz, you know what? Let me keep. I have it on my presentation, and really his words are amazing, and I want to share it with you. So after the scientific consensus was published in 2002, there was my question was, is there really no such disagreement? And I found that of course there was the disagreement, and two years later. British psychiatrist Sami Timimi and 33 supporters, the co-endorsers, published a critic of this scientific consensus, and they said what you and I said a minute ago. They said not only is it completely counter the spirit and practice of science to cease questioning the validity of ADHD, there is an ethical and moral responsibility to do so. And since then, there were many books and articles that were published on this topic, and many of them were criticizing the what we call the biomedical scientific consensus about ADHD. In my book, I collected many articles and books on this topic that first of all, just to show that there is a disagreement. You don't have to agree with me. Don't believe the expert. Now I'm the expert, so don't believe me. Just know that there is a disagreement, and you can I bring forth the material, and you can judge it for yourself. So at this point, if you want, we can start diving in and starting to present my side or our side. It's not my.
Well, no, it's yeah. I think it's probably our, but it's yours. So yeah, let's hear the argument. You have the stand, or you're going to convince the jury.
Yes. So let's try that. So in psychology and psychiatry, we have an interesting problem that we know that there are psychopathologies, that there are disorders, but who decides? How do we know that a certain behavior, human behavior, is a disorder, is an illness? How do we know? What are the rules in other fields of medicine? In medicine, so sometimes we have objective tests. We have physiological tests. We have brain images. We have all kinds of objective measures that we can rely on. And here you might stop me and say, Yaakov, don't. Also in medicine we have a lot of problems, and I'll tell you that I'm not familiar with. I'm not familiar enough to know, but I assume that in medicine it's a little bit different than in psychiatry and psychology. But in our case, the premise of the decision is very hard, because this I took it from the DSM, the Diagnosis Statistical Manual of Psychiatric Disorders. This is our Bible, right? Mm-hmm. And this manual, at the beginning of the Bible, it explains how to use it, and it says very clearly that in the absence of clear, I'm looking over there because this is where my monitor is. Mm-hmm. In the absence of clear biological markers, it has not been possible to completely separate normal and pathological symptom expressions. We have a problem. It's very hard for us to. How do we know that a certain person is shy, which is a normal personality trait, or has social anxiety? How do we know? Where is the line? And this is from something a bit more. The DSM is from this. I took from the 5th edition, so it's from 2013. But this is from 2019 from JAMA Psychiatry. JAMA is the Journal of American Medical Association, and JAMA Psychiatry is the flagship of the journals in psychiatry. And they say very explicitly that at this point of history, we do not have physiological foundations that we can rely on to make diagnosis in psychiatry. And ADHD, people need to understand, ADHD is not that different than schizophrenia or depression or bipolar. It's all in the same manual, Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Psychiatric Disorders. And this part I like the best. I took from Ronald Pies. Dr. Ronald Pies is a well-known professor of psychiatry. He's the emeritus editor of a Psychiatric Times. Psychiatric Times is a semi-academic journal, and it's very popular. And he write this article for the second time, trying to tell the readers that I'll read it in his words. As for the bogus chemical imbalance theory and its misattribution to the profession of psychiatry, it is time to drive the stake into its misbegotten heart. Now, people need to understand, Dr. Pies is not a psychiatric critic. I assume that he prescribed many psychiatric medications throughout his career. And yet, it is important to him to tell us that we cannot relate to psychiatric diagnosis as if they originate from a biochemical imbalance in the brain. And he goes further and he tells you, and please stop saying that we psychiatrists believe that and that we say that. Now we can argue if psychiatrists did that or not, but let's put this aside. Just we need to understand what is the premise of the discussion here. The premise is that in psychology and psychiatry, we do not have physiological evidence that we can say, oh, this person has has this something in his brain. No, it's not like that. It's different. We need to start from the null hypothesis, like in all other fields in science. And the null hypothesis in our case is that children are normal until proven otherwise. If you want to say that a child has a disorder, it has a psychological or psychiatric disorder, and you need to reject that null hypothesis. How do you do that? We have four key criteria that we need to look at. So the first is deviance. That the behavior that we're looking at, it has to be deviant. Let me give you an example. My father is a religious person, so when we had a Shabbat dinner, so he was inviting the angels to come and bless us in Shabbat. Now, so he believes in angels. Now, one can say, "Oh, wait a minute, the angels do not exist. Maybe he has a disorder." But if many people believe in this, if many people have this belief, we cannot argue that this is a disorder. It's not deviant enough. So this is just an exotic example to explain the criterion of deviance. But and as far as I can tell, deviance is a necessary criterion. Without it, you cannot move on and start exploring the rest, the three additional criteria, which are dysfunction, that the child will have problems in everyday functioning, not only in school, right? Also in the soccer field, or getting dressed, or taking a shower. And we have also the criterion of danger. The criterion of danger, it does not always exist, but in some disorders, for example, in depression, the person can can risk his own life, so he may be at danger. So danger is another criterion, and the final criterion, which is my favorite, is the distress criterion, because if it is important, like all other like the three other criteria, dysfunction, danger, and distress, they not always exist. But distress, you assume that if a person has a certain behavior that is deviant, if it doesn't bother him, so maybe it's not a disorder. Mm-hmm. But anyway, we have a trade-off between these criterions, and the only way to decide if a certain behavior in ADHD case is the distractions or the hyperactivity, the only way to decide if a certain behavior is eligible to become a psychiatric diagnosis is to explore the existence of these criteria. And when I did it, I discovered that that ADHD does not meet these criteria. And in our session, I will not be able to go over all the entire criterions, but I do wish to say a few words about the first criterion, because this is really unbelievable, and it refers to something that you talked about, I think, before we started the recording. And do you want me to stop here for a minute, just to?
No, carry on.
Okay. So the first criterion, the criterion of deviance, which I think that this is a necessary criterion. Without it, you cannot move on. The first criterion should be very easy to examine, because you need to ask only two questions. What is the rates of ADHD? And do these rates deviate from the normal, from the normal distribution? So these are the questions. And in science, usually when we think of what can be considered deviant, we look at the extreme ends of the normal distribution. So, for example, let's take IQ levels. So if you are located at this end, so you're two standard deviations above the mean, then you are a part of the 2.5% very intelligent persons, and you might be considered a genius. And at the other side, if you are located here, you might be considered a person who suffers from an intelligent
mental deficiency.
Yes, I lost the word for a second. So yes, intellectual disability. So but you know what? Even intellectual disability, it's not enough to be here, because we don't have 2.5% of the people who suffer from intellectual disability. We have less. We have only 1%. And why is that? Because, and even less if you consider severe cases of intellectual disability. And why is that? Because as I mentioned before, the first criterion is not enough. You need additional criteria. So when we look at this normal distribution, let's go back to ADHD. If you look at the DSM, the current edition will tell you that ADHD occurs in most cultures in about 5% of children. And by the way, it drops to 2.5% of adults. This is another validity issue. I will not touch it here because but so 5%, in my opinion, is already very, very high, but it does not stop here. It started when you studied medicine, right? In the 1980. It started when the DSM first presented ADHD. That was the first time the ADHD appeared in the DSM with a focus on attention. Before that, there were other incarnations of ADHD, but the focus on attention, on inattention, only arrived to our life in 1980. And back then, the DSM ruled that the disorder is common, and it may occur in as many as 3%. And 3% is a lot, considering the normal distribution I showed before. And by the way, here they had this problem that the disorder is 10 times more common in boys than in girls. This is really amazing how they dismiss this problem, because if you think of ADHD as a neurogenetic deficit, remember ADHD, in order to diagnose it, you need to make sure that there is evidence that the child was arrived to this world with this deficit. The ADHD cannot be environmental. This is the conceptualization of ADHD, the biomedical, at least the biomedical conceptualization of ADHD. We know today that screens and sugar and all kinds of environmental things affect our attention. And also other stuff. If your parents get divorced or you're just in love, many things affect our attention. But ADHD, in its core, it's something that it's genetic. You come to the world with this deficit. So how come boys are 10 times more vulnerable to this brain deficit? But let's put this validity issue aside and go back to the rates of the disorder. So we are talking about 3%. Back in the 80s, but then suddenly in 2011, the CDC publishes data, and the data talks about tell that we have 11% of children and adolescents who are diagnosed with ADHD. ADHD increased by 42% according to this article. And then in 2016, if you look at children that are 12 years old, you see that they have boys who are 12 years old, they will have 20% ADHD. This is really unbelievable. 1 in 5 children are diagnosed with this neurogenetic disorder. And now we come to our times, 2021. I conducted my own study on this matter, and in Israel, we are the Ritalin champions. We have over than 20% ADHD, about 23% to be more accurate. And if you don't trust me, because I'm a known ADHD critic, I also brought you data from an article that was published in 2020. And this study relied on solid medical records. It's not even self-report. And this study in Israel found between 28 and 18%, between 18 and 28% medical records of ADHD. This is really unbelievable, or really one can never say now that ADHD meets the criterion of the deviance criterion. It's just, it doesn't make sense.
No, I agree. I agree.
And
I'm
And
going
to wrap
to
up this, just let me wrap up this issue of deviance, and then I'll stop talking because I think I talk too much.
No, you don't talk too much at all.
Okay, so here we have a very interesting case of I call it in the book an either way dilemma. Either way, if the DSM is wrong, and we do not have 5% of ADHD, we actually have 20% of ADHD. That what can explain this evolutionary miracle? What happened? What do they put in our water that now we have 1 in 5 children that they have this diagnosis? And if the DSM is correct, and we do have about 5% ADHD, then we have 15% of children that are diagnosed without that they should not be diagnosed. That the diagnosis is false.
At least 3/4 of them.
Yeah, exactly. Now, if you ask physicians, and there is research about that in Israel, if physicians, experts in ADHD, were asked, "Do you think that there is overdiagnosis problem in ADHD?" They all say yes. They're not aware of the numbers that I bring in the book, so they don't know how wide is this problem. So everybody agree that we have an overdiagnosis problem. But think about it: when the overdiagnosis problem is 3 times higher than the true diagnosis, then we have a problem in the essence of in the very definition of the disorder, right? Because doctors most of them are good people. They try to give the best diagnosis that they can. Why do they make so many mistakes? It's not their fault. The problem relies within the definition of the diagnosis.
Yeah.
And this is only one validity issue that I discuss in my book.
So I'm going to interject just for a second, because you've made a lot of ideas bubble up in my head, and my own psychiatric problems that I like to let some of those out. So I apologize. But I was thinking about something completely different. I had an email exchange with a friend of mine, maybe more like a frenemy. And we were talking about a totally different topic. But I was looking at an article from the Lancet today, and I'm just going to show it here. And these are my words, but the graphs from the Lancet very recently about police violent interactions with the police. And so I interposed these 2 charts. One is for women, it was on top, but I just put it on this other one. So females over here on the bottom. So my interactions that end in violence and mortality with the police, it's mostly, sorry about that. It's mostly guys. It's like 98% men, very rarely female. And so why is that? It's mostly certain, kind of age group. You get this, I keep touching something. You get the Gaussian curve, basically. So what is it? Is it that police like to, kind of, get at men only? They only want to hit men? Well, there's got to be something else happening. Maybe men are more violent than women, and they start interacting differently. And so I think this gets to the key point where you mentioned that ADHD is 10 times more frequent in men. So I was thinking about this for a long time. I've been thinking about this topic. So I'm kind of glad you came along. But, the ideal game for girls, young girls, tends to be, something community. So like, they'll have a tea party, a pretend get together, and they're all social. They're drinking tea and they're conversing and fixing things, whatever. Boys play, we call it King of the Hill, where one guy wants to be on top. This translates to our whole sports method. We like to win. I mean, I'm sure women and girls like to win, but not the same way. Not the same way. So when you go to school, maybe if you went back a few thousand years, boys and girls had different types of experience. They didn't necessarily have formalized school. Maybe the boys went out and apprenticed with the men, learned to hunt, learned to carve, learned to cut, an animal, so forth. And the women had different skills. I mean, women get pregnant, men don't. So there's always going to be some, biological necessity to divide the skills up a little bit, because men don't have that downtime of being pregnant, and everyone has to keep eating when somebody does get pregnant. So anyway, so there's probably a teleologic, evolutionary reason for this separation of interest. But when you head into school, So, the boys are kind of always going to be more, there's a lot of stuff going on. They want to get out physically and do things. They want to act on things. They want to be aggressive. They want to put their will, exert their will. But school is really kind of the feminine ideal of everyone sitting in accord, quietly, conversing, having turns, taking your turn. And so to get to my point, I think there's kind of a form-fitting process that goes on, and the ones that don't fit the form. So if everyone has to kind of be inside, we get the cookies back in the cookie cutter. There are going to be some who fit better and some that don't. And the boys are the ones that are not going to fit as easily into the category of wanting to sit politely, raise your hand, answer questions, learn, and do, with a lather, rinse, repeat, do this over and over again. And so I think the reason you'll see more ADHD in boys is those are the boys who give the teachers trouble. The teachers in elementary schools, at least US, are almost all women. And I think, they're going to see things as women. And there's going to be, a way in which the boy way is not their way. And so, anyway, that's kind of my discourse and my digression. I apologize. But I think you see these huge numbers because it's easier for the teacher to try to do something. And that whether that something is actually accurate and apt and appropriate and efficacious is a whole other story. But the fact of channeling and funneling that child to have something done brings it to attention where they can't do the other things, which is to unlearn some of the behaviors or have that child be better parented at home or better prepared for school or have a different type of school or have a school that attends to boys more natural kind of physical aggression. Sorry, I'm sorry about that.
No, this is beautiful. And in my book, first of all, one of the people who endorsed the book is Tom Hartman. Tom Hartman is an American public intellectual, and he authored the book ADHD, A Hunter in a Farmer's World. And this corresponds with what you said before. And I just want to mention another thing that you reminded me a fantastic series of studies that were published in Science, and these studies were on. They took people and they asked them to sit quietly and for 15 minutes. That's all, without doing nothing, without their telephone, without anything. And that was a very aversive. It was experienced as a very aversive event for most of the participants, and men, as opposed to women, men were willing to press a button that gave them an electric shock just to have something to be busy with. And this is an amazing the experience of boredom, or what they call in the article, they call the disengaged mind. It's such an aversive experience for humans in general and for boys in particular. And so I tend to agree, and also to see your more historical evolutionary perspective on this matter.
Yeah. So I'm just going to mention one other thing that boys and girls act out differently. Not only do they act differently, but they act out differently. So I'm a primary care physician, but I've seen my share of psychological and psychiatric issues over the time because I deal with humans, and humans have those things. But there's a thing of suicide. So when men try suicide, they succeed. When women try suicide, about 95% of the time, I think it is, don't quote me, but some almost universal time women try suicide, they don't succeed. Why is that? Do men just know how to do it better? No. Women trying suicide is a completely different thing. It's a call for help. When men want to try suicide, it's because they want to kill themselves. And so they have different intentions and they act differently. This is, one aspect I had a really hard time convincing kind of a psychologically, medically minded friend of mine. These are totally different things. It's not the same thing when men and women, try suicide. And,
but something interesting happened in ADHD. It started as a boy's condition, as we saw in the first, in the DSM, in the third edition of the DSM. But then the numbers started to even out. And I think that I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theory, but they needed to sell drugs. So they were looking for other markets. And now they started to diagnose girls more and more. But look what happened. Very interesting. Another unbelievable validity problem. That you take a child, an ADHD child with the H, right, with the hyperactivity, like my son, very energetic, curious and physical, and you take a quiet and dreamy girl who sits in the back of the class and drawing things, and they both have the same neurogenetic problem, one with H and one with other, and they will both receive the same treatment. This is the treatment of choice, right? The treatment for ADHD is not like one out of several treatments that the physicians can give. This is the treatment of choice. The guidelines that the physicians receive, they tell them you need to prescribe these stimulant medications. And maybe if we meet for a second session, we can dedicate our second session to the medications for ADHD. Today we mainly discussed the validity of the disorder itself. So and now I see that aside from girls, they try to bring down the age of the diagnosis to diagnose the very small kids, very small children in kindergarten.
Yeah, no, I think it's an unavoidable. Again, I'm not a conspiracy guy, but I do observe things. You know, conspiracy, the word means to breathe together, and so conspiracy, and we're all breathing the same air, and we're all in the same place. And these trends happen in societies that do this. Now, I think if you look across societies, you're going to find vastly different numbers of cases, as it were. Back again in the dark ages when I was in medical school. One professor, epidemiologic, whatever, he was talking about the diagnosis of back pain, which is hugely common in the United States, perhaps the second most common diagnosis, and the largest cause of intermittent disability in the United States is back pain. All kinds of treatment, chiropractors. Anyway, there's a huge industry from car accidents and this and that around back pain. And he was mentioning, I think someplace in East Africa, it might have been Uganda at the time in the 1980s, that they didn't really have this diagnosis show up because they didn't have a framework for which people would have workman's compensation, from which they'd get paid for not working. They only got paid if they worked. And so they either had or didn't have back pain, but it was neither here nor there because nobody complained about it because it didn't do anything. There was no point to complaining about it because they had to go to work if they wanted to eat. If they didn't want to eat, they stopped working. If they stopped working and stopped eating, then they didn't have any problems at all because they stopped living. And so a lot of these things are conditional based on what the situation is. And there are ways of monetizing a problem. You know, I grew up in an age where there were zero chiropractors around. And we had fault insurance. They invented no fault insurance, which meant that every party in an accident could get reimbursed. And all of a sudden, chiropractic took off. And I want to get into all those details, but there are aspects of medical care which fill a void and a need, and some of that's real and some of that's applied. And once it's applied long enough, people think it's real. So I think that we go through phases in our treatment where the treatments sometimes start to become they go in search of a problem. And I'll leave it there. I mean, I think we can all make analogies to certain other examples that we've come across.
No, but it's really, as I said at the beginning of the conversation, it's really refreshing for me to hear someone who has this holistic view of medicine. So you can bring examples from other fields. It's very, very interesting to me. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I have to say, I'm not mainstream medicine. I'm primary care, and I had my own practice for about 30 years. But, I was a little bit, I'm an outlier in a lot of different aspects. I treated narcotic addiction in my office for about 10 years, and I was treating with Suboxone to sobriety. And that's a whole nother topic. With our third session, we'll talk about this one. But, my basic tenet was that addiction is not a disease. I mean, narcotic addiction, I think it's a trauma. I think it's sad. I think it's severe. I think it can kill you. Like breaking your hip is a trauma, and it can kill you. You may never walk the same again. It can be, severely debilitating or deadly. But that doesn't mean it's a disease in and of itself. It's something that came from something that happened to you. It could be you have bad balance. It could be you got hit by a car. It could be your fault. It might not be your fault. But narcotic addiction is not a long-term illness, just like ADD or ADHD is not necessarily a long-term historic illness. I think there are behavioral aspects about people which might lend them to having this diagnosis and or having narcotic addiction. I think there are issues in their lives, their personal traumas, there are all kinds of things. Too long and lengthy, that would be 15 sessions in order to try to parse and separate those. But the human experience is varied, and I think over time people deal with their problems or they don't deal with their problems. But sometimes to label one of these things as a disease, that's people, we think we're helping people, but oftentimes we're helping ourselves as treating physicians, psychologists, and so forth.
Especially when you talk about young children who are still developing, and the same functions that are said to be impaired in ADHD, they're still developing.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, I'm gonna cut. Your son's young still, but my older son's 31 years old, and so I kept saying no. We're just gonna we're gonna wait and see how this goes. I'll give you one really. It's not quite related, but almost related. So he was a big kid, and he was kind of ahead he was at this Montessori school, and he was in with kids of different ages. So he got in there like almost 4 years old, but he was bigger than all the other kids. And one point, the teacher, this is kind of a cute story. The teacher came to me and said, we want to send him to speech therapy. I said, why is that? Well, because he says lello instead of yellow. I said, well, okay, well, I think his major speech problem is that he's too tall. And she looked at me. She's like, this guy's a moron. So she repeated the whole thing. She said, no, he's got a speech problem. I said, no, I get it. I think his speech problem is that he's too tall. And she's like dumbfounded. I said, well, let me explain. Okay, how old is he? She's like, I don't know, 6, 5. I said, no, he just turned 4. It's like, oh my God, he just turned 4? He's so tall for his age. I'm like, well, there you have it. Anyway, my point is,
this is a great story.
He grew into.
Do you give me permission to use this story? It's really a great story.
So when he was 5, he spoke like a 5-year-old. When he was 6, he spoke like a 6-year-old. Maybe he wasn't as good as some of the other 6-year-olds. I get it. Okay, maybe he had his own issues. I don't know how well he said yellow versus some other 5-year-old, but he didn't say it when he was 4. He didn't say as good as a 6-year-old, and that's where her mindset was. That was her expectation level, what he should be. So a lot of times you're working against the expectation level of the teacher, and the teacher's natural tendency is to offload it. I've got an issue. I got to offload. I got to do something about this, and this happens in medicine right now. Everyone wants to offload something so we don't have to think about it. Anyway, So I'll cut to answer the question about my son is that we wound up doing other accommodations. He couldn't sit and write. He could not sit and write. We didn't have him sit. We'd go for a walk. I'd take him out. We run. We throw a ball, whatever. And on the way back home, I'd have the microphone. I'd say, so Sam, what about that paper on, I don't know, Abraham Lincoln? What do you think about Abraham? Well, he'd say, we read this book, and I think Abraham, whatever. I don't know what the topic was. He would go rattle on. I had it all recorded. I would transcribe, which was harder work then. I'd transcribe it, and it was only his work. And I put it in front of him, and we had computers. And I put it in front of him, and then he would play with it. He'd put the words around. He'd have his report, and that was it. It's not like he couldn't know what Abraham Lincoln was. Not that he couldn't think of it. It's not that he wasn't smart enough. I mean, I'm not saying he's the smartest or the dumbest. He was, but the problem he had was sitting down in front of a white screen or white piece of paper and sitting and doing nothing and having to think of something. That was his problem. And so you can categorize or qualify that as an illness. I don't think it's an illness. I think it's a combination. We in private email, I sent you one other point, which is I watch American football. And even amongst that, I mean, they're all football players. They're all, aggressive and strong and all that kind of stuff. But even amongst that group, there are some people who are going to be quarterback and some people are never going to be quarterback. There's some people who are really good at defense, which is more of a reactive thing. You have to see and act quickly. Those might be your ADHD people. It's not that they're not smart, but their instincts are direct. Again, getting back to your hunter-farmer analogy. And so the guys that my son wound up playing football, and they put him on offense for whatever reason. He was, whatever. He liked learning to play, having all advanced. But they're all different categories and characteristics. Some people don't work out in certain positions. Doesn't mean they're bad. It just means they may not have found the right fit for their capabilities. And I think the real issue with schooling is that it's kind of diverged from finding those capabilities within people to assuming that everyone has to become an accountant or everyone has to become a professor, all that kind of stuff. And we have different expectations than what really people necessarily are.
We ignore the multiple intelligence we children have and human beings have.
Yeah. So we're heading towards the end of the hour. And I'd like to give you the last word and then I'm going to have one last word. So maybe sum up this session. If I can invite you back again, I'd love to have you. But you don't have to say yes yet. But why don't you, in maybe 2 minutes, summarize where you are, what your thoughts are, and what's your advice for parents and people?
It's a good question. I'll just summarize our conversation today and say that my journey in this field, trying to at least present the other side, that the ADHD may not be an illness, and that maybe it's not the best way to treat it with, or to give children with such powerful medications. This journey was really not easy. I'm happy that I did it, but I see how hard is it to sell it, to tell people, listen, just read it, just be. So when you contacted me and you suggested that I'll come to your show, I was really glad, because I'm happy to talk about it, and I really wish people will read the book, because it's not because I wrote it, because it's really, really an important piece that I gathered as much evidence as I could, and I structured it very, very nicely and very elegant. And although it's a scientific book, I always had parents on my mind. I dedicate this book to parents. I think that parents are the heroes of this tragic history, and I really wish they will read it.
Fair enough. So here's your book. I'm just going to briefly scroll through some of these things. I'll put them on the comments section. But here's some of your work. Here's I guess the book again. And what else? This is another one of your pieces here. I'm going to just put links to them. This is from excerpts from your book. Here's an interview from Israel. The YouTube's actually in a different in Hebrew, so the people are not going to understand it. Right. Here's a good story from Mad in America, the story of Dr. Ophir and ADHD. I'll put links to this. You wrote your own article in Brownstone. Are we medicating millions of ADHD children without scientific justification?
Your viewers should know that I write much better than I talk.
No, you did fine. You do much better than we can do conversely. And so I'm going to end with my own shameless self-promotion. We have some similarities. I'll maybe get into this later.
I saw that. Beautiful.
But I have a book here, Overturning Zika, the pandemic that never was. This was a big deal in 2015-16 in Brazil and large other parts of the tropical world. And women are still being told to stay indoors if they're pregnant, or put slather on insect repellent for fear of microcephaly happening to their babies. But it never really necessarily happened in the first place, and didn't happen in the second year in 2016 in Brazil. Nobody's come out to explain why. We're going along with this. This hasn't been monetized yet. And there's a Zika vaccine around the corner, and I'm sure women are going to be told to take it, and then they're going to announce it disappeared, but it's been gone for almost a decade. So here's my book. You can purchase it on Amazon. There's my self-portrait. This is me when I wake up in the morning, and there you have it. So anyway, so I'm going to leave it there. We're heading around almost an hour. Thank you so much. If you'd like Yaakov to come back on, yell and scream, clap, let us know. Please share this widely. I'm going to put it up on as many social media places as I can. And I look forward to having you back again. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Randy.
All right. You can hang around. We'll chat for a second. We're going to say goodbye to everybody else. Thank you.